they realized that they were going to have to exploit it. And
Oh,
they would ask about my insecurities. I recoiled from that too. I just did not want to give them access to that part of myself because it felt too intimate and too scary. Do you think that your new haircut makes you look fat? Do you think that your new haircut makes you look like a man? Do you think your new haircut makes you look more plus size, less plus size? Are you trying to lose weight? Do you feel fat compared to the other girls when you wake up in the morning and you see them in the mirror and they don't need any makeup? Do you feel bad about yourself? And it really was like having someone outside your body saying all the worst things that you have in your head. I don't know how long we drove. I don't know how long we sat in the hot bus, but I do know that I wasn't the only person to vomit from heat stroke. So it was a long time, and we were sitting there blindfolded. It's very weird. It's like very fancy jail, and a lot of the girls really struggled and really hated it. I talked to Kimberly Lehmans, and she was like, "Yeah, I mean, I told the shrink like I'm not okay. I feel like my world has been destroyed. I feel like I've lost my sense of self. I don't know what to do. I'm not okay."
I have to get your true opinions on Tyra and what she was like on camera versus off camera.
Mine is the only voice.
Wow.
What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey guys, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening on those podcast platforms and you would like to see our faces, go to YouTube at Cults to Consciousness. It is truly the best way to support the show. It's free to like, subscribe, comment. Leaving those words of encouragement for our guests means so much to them. They appreciate it. It boosts the algorithm. Whenever our core audience clicks on a video, YouTube says, hey, the core audience likes it. Let's boost it to more people who are not subscribers. So that's the best way to help us grow and get these culty messages out there and further platform our guests. So today, I am so excited for this. It is completely different than anything we have ever done. And it was recommended by you, actually, Persephone, when we put out a call to our people. We're like, hey guys, who do you want to see on the show? Persephone was like, you have to get this girl from America's Next Top Model. And I'm so excited because I have some experience a little bit with that, experience with the industry, experience with reality TV. And we're going to be talking about all the ways America's Next Top Model acted like a cult within the manipulation, the abuse, all the things that went on behind the scenes. She wrote a book about it. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah Hartshorne.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Persephone.
Yes, this is so fun. And well, it's never fun to talk about hard things, of course, but it's fun to connect with you on this level. Like I mentioned in the intro, there are so many ways that we can connect. And I'm going to try not to just talk the whole time because I'm going to be like, me too. No way. I understand. But this is going to be great. So you just released a book, which we didn't even say the name of your book.
You want to be on top.
You want to be on top.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that name. So everyone go buy it after this.
Thank you so much.
So you just released a book a few months ago about your experiences, kind of blowing the lid wide off of America's Next Top Model, which is no longer running, but I feel like was a huge part of pop culture in that time. When did it start? It ended 2011, right?
Actually, no, the final cycle aired, I think, in 2017, maybe?
No way. Then maybe just the seasons that I looked up online were not showing up because it said end of 2011. Wow, so it ran a while.
It had a few different iterations, and it had a few different hosts, and so I'm not sure when, it was technically considered a different show. Like Rita Ora hosted for a while, Ashley Graham hosted for a while.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what of those was the same show, but there was a model competition with that name on the show until pretty late. There were something like 27 cycles or something.
That is insane. So you were on season 9 with Tyra Banks, and I think it's safe to say anyone in that kind of millennial time frame watched it looking up to these models like, oh my gosh, they're so beautiful, they're so amazing. And of course, Tyra, she is just stunning. And I'm excited to hear what she was really like on the show, because as someone who's been on reality TV with the hosts that everyone's like, oh, what are they like? it is usually very different on camera versus off camera. So I'm excited to hear your takes on that. So I think first, though, before we get into the show and everything, I think it's important to talk a little bit about where you came from and your family, because that'll get into how they manipulated that information on the show when you got on it. So if you could just give a little bit about your background, your parents, how you grew up, and where you came from before the show.
Yeah, I grew up in Western Massachusetts. I was born in New Hampshire, but moved at a very young age to Western Mass. So that's very much what shaped me. And my parents were divorced and sort of weird hippies, with like lots of carob and fruit leather as snacks, if that paints a picture. You know, um, yeah, like yogurt covered pretzels were sort of the closest thing to candy I had a lot of times as a kid. Although I did become a master at trading and bartering in the lunchroom from a pretty young age. But yeah, I grew up. It's a really wonderful place to grow up. When I go home and visit, I really really love it, and I absolutely could not wait to leave. From a young age, I knew that I wanted to live in cities and I wanted to specifically live in New York City. So I'm really happy that I do now. And that actually all started because my parents divorced when I was, or they separated when I was around 10 months old. And so I kind of bounced around a little bit after that. I stayed with my aunt and uncle, I stayed with my grandparents, and my aunt and uncle lived in Brooklyn. And I loved staying with them. I loved being in the city. And I now actually live really close to where they lived. And it feels like this very beautiful full circle moment that I'm like,
Yeah.
I've been in the city for, I don't know, 15 years, but I'm now back where I really fell in love with it in the first place. And yeah, I have a very big, weird, complicated family. Everyone's been married 4 times. Nobody knows who their dad is. I do, but a lot of people, my mom didn't, my grandma didn't, my aunt doesn't, a lot of my cousins don't. And we're sort of pioneers in divorce. I think it's a lot more common now, but my great grandparents were getting divorced and remarried again. And my family is full of lore, I guess is a good way to put it. But I had a pretty normal childhood in Massachusetts. My mom married my stepdad, and we lived in a really, really small town. It was really rural. And then I knew I wanted to go to the city, but I didn't get into NYU, so I went to Boston University instead, and that was where I ended up on the show. But
Okay.
yeah, it's hard to say. It was really interesting, when I was on the show, and I was sort of nervous about what about my life they were going to pick up on, because they had us really outline everything. What they were most interested in was the fact that I worked on a blueberry farm starting at age 11. I started working full time because I hated camp. So I asked my parents if I could get a job, and I also, needed money, and we didn't have a lot, and so I got a full-time job. My parents would drop me off on the way to work, and they'd pick me up when they were done. So I worked on farms all of my teenage years, and I waitressed when I was old enough, and I definitely have had a lot of jobs, and I had already had a lot of jobs even by the time I was on the show.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned they had you fill out these forms to dig into your past and your traumas. In fact, I remember a little memory popped up when I was reading through your book about watching the show, because I wanted to be on that show so bad. Oh my gosh, I wanted to be on it. My sister, she actually lived in Chicago. She was with Elite. So she's 10 years older than me from my dad's previous. So I didn't really grow up with her because I was in Utah. She was in Chicago. She was this gorgeously tall, taller than me. She's like 5'9", I think, super slender, and she was with Elite, that which is basically the modeling contract you win on the show. And so I just wanted to be just like her. We had posters of her in our house from the department stores that she was in, all that stuff. So every day I would walk down the stairs and see these posters of my sister who I wanted to be just like. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to be on the show. I want to be on the show. So, spoiler alert, I actually auditioned for it twice. I auditioned for it twice. She took me to the Chicago audition. So we went there. I waited in line. I think I made it past 2 of the rounds because the line is just wrapped around blocks and blocks and blocks. Huge, like hundreds of people show up for these, of course, in Chicago too. And so I remember making it past a couple rounds. And then when I didn't make it, she walked me into Elite to her former agent and was like, hey, this is my sister. Would you guys be interested in signing her? Took a couple Polaroids and nothing happened. But I wanted to be on so bad. And then I'll tell you about the second time later. But anyways, the memory popped up for me, which is I don't know if I have a traumatic enough backstory for them to even want to cast me because it seemed like anytime you watch the show, they were pulling from these people's backgrounds and it was so emotional. And I was like, clearly they pick people who have these rough backgrounds or something that they can talk about. And I don't know if I would even qualify, not knowing that people thought Mormonism was weird. And I totally could have capitalized on that. But
But at that age, you don't know what's weird, you know? You're still figuring it out.
yeah.
Like, I always like to say when I went to college, I thought I had a super normal childhood. And even now, I still find myself, like I just said a few minutes ago, like I had a really normal childhood. But then when I went to college, I remember like seeing people's reactions to what I thought were these funny, silly little stories. a- And seeing their reactions being like, oh, I actually did not have a normal childhood, because you don't know. Yeah, you don't know that Mormon is that not everyone grows up in the Mormon church, or
Yeah.
I didn't know that not everyone had a million grandparents, and not everyone had all this crazy family backstory, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like you become a detective of like figuring out what's weird and what's normal whenever
Yeah.
you're first exposed to the world in whatever capacity that was. For me, it was college. For a lot of people, it's college. For some people, it's their first job or whatever it is that like gets you out surrounded by people that you maybe didn't grow up around, and you
Absolutely.
get this whole new context.
Yeah, the bubble pops and you're like, "Wait a second, I need to reassess." So,
Yeah.
you weren't even allowed to watch TV, which I find interesting that you end up on this hugely popular, probably at its height, TV show.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about how you were even introduced to this idea of wanting to be on ANTM.
Yeah, actually, it's not that I wasn't allowed to watch TV, it's that we didn't have TV. TV wasn't an option. I grew up in such a rural area with such small towns that, you got the bunny ears. Like, I was allowed to watch Roseanne because we got one channel, and that was sort of the only show that my parents, liked, and so we would sometimes watch that. And then we moved to an even smaller town, and we didn't even have the bunny ears, so it really was more that I just wasn't exposed to it other than,
Got it.
visiting my grandparents, and then I would just obsess about it. I remember I would watch VH1 and MTV obsessively, and I would read my grandmother's fashion magazines, and it felt like a crash course and everything I had missed throughout the year. And it was so exciting. But yeah, my parents were not super strict. We just lived in an area that cables didn't reach. There just weren't enough people. So when I went to college, that's when I had my first exposure to like unlimited junk food and TV, and it really was like this whole new world. And I made friends my very first day with Michael Apgar, and he's still one of my closest friends to this day, and he was very much my like Sherpa into the world of television. He was so shocked. He was like, "You've never seen a reality show?" And so we watched cycle 8 of America's Next Top Model.
And that was
And
the moment.
And that was the moment. And he was like, also, you should watch Friends and Sex in the City. So I was like watching
Yeah.
Sex in the City on, the TBS version, like the basic cable version, but it was still so exciting to me. And it was all like, everything I'd ever dreamed of as a teenager.
Yes. So let's talk about the audition process because it is absolutely insane. Any audition for a reality TV show and going back to the whole they're really crafting a story and it's way less about the competition. I auditioned for So You Think You Can Dance in LA because again, I was like, I can do that. I can be on it. And in fact, I think I was voted like most likely to be on So You Think You Can Dance. And so I was like, I got to prove them right. This high school voted me. So I go, and the first thing they say in this huge auditorium of people is, "Hi, guys, just so you know, you're not auditioning for a dance show, you're auditioning for reality TV." Anyways, and they just like were so casual about it. Like, I don't care if you're a good dancer or not. This is for TV. And that's really what it was like. I'm sure for ANTM as well, they're trying to figure out all of your traumas, your backstories, pain points, things that they can point to and
Yeah.
exploit. So, what was that process like for you?
I mean, the audition process is so crazy. 10,000 people tried out in Boston, which is where I auditioned, and it was I mean, it just was it's so many girls, and it immediately became clear once I was going through the process why people tried out over and over again, because I remember I was in line, it was like 5:30 in the morning, and I had done an all-nighter the night before. It was my final midterm paper, and I finished it, handed it in at this was back when you had to hand papers in person, at my professor's office, like, sliding it through the door,
Yeah.
and then I took the train to the Prudential Center and stood in line, and there were these girls who were talking about how they'd tried out, like, 6 or 7 times before, and I was like, "That's crazy. Why would you try out more than once for the same show?" Not understanding that it was completely random, and the second I was, like, in the door, 4 hours later, or even longer, and they, shuttled us into this ballroom and had us they kept saying, "Nose to the back of the person in front of you's head," like, "Nose to the back of the head," and that they meant that, like, my nose was supposed to be touching the head of the girl in front of me, and I was one of the only people in the room whose boobs went out past their nose. So I'm, like, squishing in, trying to, like, get my nose to the back of her head, and we have numbers on our arms, and they just sort of pick a few of us, and so you don't even get to the trauma and the personality until the
Right.
next day. They did have us fill out applications when we were waiting, and that did outline all of our
That's right. I remember
life,
that.
and I mean, I remember, like, the section that I knew was the important section was stressors in your life, and it broke it down into, I think almost a dozen categories. It was like family stress, financial stress, health insurance stress, roommate stress. Has anyone in your family been arrested? Have you been arrested? Um, do you have kids? What is your fit? Like it down to like incredibly specific categories. Like, I mean, yeah, like health insurance. Have you ever not had health insurance, or has any have you ever lost a house to fire or tragedy or flood? And I was like, oh my god, I have. And it's so
Yeah.
weird because you're there and you're like, yes, my house burned down in third grade. I'm in. And it's just so surreal because you're really breaking your life down into these categories, and trying to use like TV friendly, catchy language around it. I remember writing that my dad and I had been homeless for a while, which is true because after the house burned down, he didn't have a place to live right away. But I felt so slimy using it because he could stay with his brother. I was with him and my mom. Like, we were never on the streets, and it felt like false valor. I felt like I was wearing military garb without serving, and it just but I also wanted my backstory to seem more interesting. And
Yeah.
also, I hadn't processed a lot of my trauma at the time, which I actually feel pretty lucky for because I didn't ever address it and I didn't know how to articulate it, and so they didn't really have access to it because I
Mhm.
didn't have access to it. So in that way, I sort of got lucky.
Yeah, isn't it so interesting that moment when they're just like going through I think there were probably 100 girls in the room and they are just like calling numbers, step forward, step forward, step
Mhm.
forward, everyone go. And then they do it again. Step forward, step forward, step forward, everyone go. And you're just
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, am I good enough? Am I good enough? Am I pretty enough? Am I tall enough? Am I thin enough? Am I enough, 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 enough? And it's just based on your frame, right? Which makes sense. Models, sure, absolutely. Like you have to fit into
Yeah.
the samples. And I understand that, like blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, it does so much to your brain of your self-worth of am I enough to be seen as pretty, you know?
From this one angle to this one person,
Yes.
to this casting associate in Boston, Massachusetts, from this angle with a number on my app. Did they have the tape on the wall? They had tape on the wall, that was at, I think, 5'8", and anyone who was
Oh,
below it, they just immediately sent out.
you know what? I don't remember that.
Yeah.
I definitely wasn't 5'8", and I felt like that's why I was like, I didn't make it because I wasn't tall enough because I wasn't. I mean, I'm only 5'5.5". I think I just round up to 5'6" when I tell people how tall I am. And so that was the biggest thing too, is there's nothing I could do about it. I just have to be taller and I can't do anything about it.
I know. Which, and it really speaks to, when people say like, "Oh, what advice do you have for people who want to go on reality TV?" My answer is always like, don't care about how you look. Don't try to get validation from this show. You won't
Hmm.
get it. Just know that you can't really predict what you're going to get out of any experience, but particularly reality TV, because it's such a surrender of control. So whatever you are looking for, you're not going to find it. If you
Oh,
go in
yeah.
with any expectations, they won't be met. And that's okay. There's a lot of things about filming the show that are not okay, but the fact that it's not going to give you validation is okay, because you know you're going to be a lot more successful on the show and also in your life, and a lot happier if you are not seeking it, I think. So
Absolutely. So I want to know more about the process that I didn't see, of course, behind the scenes. Day 2, did they start to do one-on-one interviews, or what did that look like? And were there any red flags that you can notice now, looking back at it, that you just ignored because it was so exciting?
there were for sure red flags, even probably starting on day 1, that I didn't notice at the time, that I might look back on and question now. But day 2 was a little bit more intimate. It was, of the, I want to say at least 100 girls that were called into the room at a time on the first day. 2 of us got callbacks to the next day. So that's sort of the number of 10,000 girls tried out. It was a much smaller group, and we all waited in line. They had like a runway set up, and we had to do a walk in our bathing suit, and we had to do a walk in our regular clothes. And we also did interview with sort of a panel of casting associates, one of whom I think was like we would see later in the process. So it was like a higher up casting associate or even a producer. And there was a camera there, and so it was filmed. And so they would say, if you could talk to Tyra right now, like, what would you say? And it was also pretty guided. And this was when they had actually looked at the application that we'd filled out the day before. So I had someone there looking at what I'd written, and I was so nervous. I was like, are they going to be nervous that I'm a go-go dancer, that I do burlesque? Like, are they going to be upset about that? And they were like, tell us about the blueberry farm. And I was like, bet, no further questions. I absolutely will. If you don't mind, I don't mind. Let's go. Blueberry farm, absolutely. What I didn't really understand was that they were trying to create this naive farm girl angle. And so because I didn't really know what they were looking for, I didn't really know how to play into it, but I did the best I could, and I said like, Tyra, please don't send me back to the blueberry farm. Like, do you know how boring it is on a blueberry farm? Do you know how many blueberry muffins there are in the state of Massachusetts? I do. And I just sort of tried to make them laugh. And they did also actually have me do my runway walk twice, because they were like, you need to look more confident. And I was like, God, you want me to be more confident? Me too. That makes 2 of us. Wouldn't it be great? But I, again, just faked it till I made it. And so I tried to walk more confidently. Yeah, it was just sort of surreal. The whole experience was surreal. It was just so weird. But, I do remember there was a girl that was at that callback that I met that day that ended up being on the show, Mila. She was eliminated first, but she was from Boston, and I saw her there, and everyone was the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. So
So intimidating. And now I can just mention it because I do remember getting to the runway walk. At the second audition, I went an hour out of LA because I was like, okay, that one is going to be way less competition than Chicago. And it was. There was probably only 400 people there total, and I made it a little bit further. And the reason I re-auditioned was because it was a short season. They're like, finally casting short girls. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a
I remember that. Yeah.
yeah, so I auditioned for that, didn't make it. But anyway, yes, I remember that process and thinking, okay, if I can just get into this, they're now accepting short girls. But then my issue was, okay, well, I'm short, but I've always had big hips and I've always had a butt. And I was like, there's no way they're going to pick me because I'm never going to fit into the samples. So let's talk about how you were chosen as a quote, in huge air quotes, plus size model. You were the only one for that season. And I watched some of the episodes back today and I was like, how the hell did
I
they
know.
consider her plus size? So can we talk about, because I know this is a big part of your journey too, what size you were and how they told you, oh, you're going to be the plus size model, or did they?
They did. They told me that I would be the plus size model. I think that second day, they said, "Oh, we need to see your confidence. We want you to show off that curvy body. What does it mean to you to represent the plus size girls? What does it mean to you to be the plus size contestant?" And I had absolutely no answer. I had no frame of reference for it because I didn't shop at plus size stores. I wasn't a plus size person and I didn't know enough about the industry to understand the difference between a plus size person and a plus size model. And I think if I had, I would have been very frustrated, but that's a whole other conversation. But the fact remains still to this day that a plus size person and a plus size model are not the same thing. And so I knew that all the other girls that were there had probably been told their whole life that they should model, and I had
Mm-hmm.
not. That wasn't something that people said to me. It wasn't something that I thought. I had mono, I think, or I had something. I lost a bunch of weight when I was like 14, and then I was like, I wonder if I'll get skinny enough to model, and I didn't because I don't think my frame is meant to be that thin. But I was a size 8 or a size 10. Again, women's clothing sizes are so chaotic. Sometimes I was a 6,
Yeah.
sometimes I was a 10, but I was very thin because I'm also 5'11". Like that's
Oh
a
my
very
gosh.
thin frame.
Yeah.
And so I didn't I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what they were looking for. I didn't know to be like, absolutely, curvy girls rock and real women have curves. I didn't have those like catchphrases that sort of entered the zeitgeist and became a part of our awareness, like around that time or a little later. And so I just was sort of going off of like the J.C. Penney catalogs and Newport News catalogs that my mom got. I knew that they had a plus size section, and I was like, "Is that me?"
So good.
Right?
I
Such a
remember
thing.
those.
Yeah. Um, and I stumbled through and I tried to be body positive, but I just didn't have the language and I just also did not feel positively about my own body. So I certainly didn't know how to make anyone else feel good about theirs. I and I did make it through, but I just remember being like, man, I'm not saying what they want to hear right now when they asked me about it. And that was my first introduction. And I didn't really think anything of it again until like I landed to shoot the first episode and I was talking to some girls in the airport in Puerto Rico when we landed to shoot the first episode. And I realized that like the plus size thing was going to be my thing and my angle. And I felt this pit in my stomach when I realized that I was going to have to talk about my body and my weight a lot, which going on a reality show seems obvious. It had just never occurred to me because, you know, I was a dumb 19-year-old. but But I think, I didn't understand at the time that I had a burgeoning eating disorder, and when you have an eating disorder, your weight is the thing that you think about the most and that you talk about the least.
Hmm.
It's very much like, if I would have kept it hidden under a rock, and I would never have talked about my body or my weight, and so I was sort of realizing, like, "Oh, no, someone's gonna lift up this rock, and we're gonna have to talk about it."
And you mentioned in one of your previous interviews, the seed was there, the seed was planted, and they watered it. It was something that was being brought out, not necessarily in a healthy or positive way, as far as embracing it, or Tyra liked to use the word empowerment, but it was nothing of the sort. It was very much exploiting it and putting it out in the open to make you feel bad about it because they weren't giving you positive comments. It was negative comments about your body.
Yeah, I think they tried at first to do positive comments, like at that second audition, they were like, "Show off that curvy body. We wanna see confidence." And I think when I wasn't able to do that, they realized that they were gonna have to exploit it and to
Go the other
display
way.
it in a different way, and
Oh,
so then they would ask about my insecurities. And I again, because I was so upset that this rock was getting lifted and that my inner business was being put on display, I recoiled from that too. I just did not want to give them access to that part of myself because it felt too intimate and too scary to face, and I couldn't face it myself. So I certainly wasn't going to let strangers on TV face it, which I think is a good defense mechanism, but I am sad that I had to have that defense mechanism, and I am sad that they saw those insecurities as something to sort of poke at and exploit, and that they also introduced so many new ones every day. It was, do you feel do you think that your new haircut makes you look fat? Do you think that your new haircut makes you look like a man? Do you think your new haircut makes you look more plus size, less plus size? Are you trying to lose weight? Do you feel fat compared to the other girls when you wake up in the morning and you see them in the mirror and they don't need any makeup? Do you feel bad about yourself? And it really was like having someone outside your body saying all the worst things that you have in your head, you know? And I think anyone who's been like surprised at their own negative self-talk can imagine what it would be like to have somebody ask that, to just,
Yeah.
someone like trying to pick at your deepest insecurities.
Right. They're giving you negative affirmations, reinforcing those bad thoughts in your head about who you are or who you should be. And before we get into all the other exploitative natures of the show and dangerous nature of the show, we have to talk about the contracts because I have signed contracts like that. I was on another reality show, brief story. That was called 72 Hours. It's like Survivor meets Amazing Race. It was fun, very much rigged. The whole thing, that's a whole story for another day.
Wow.
But I remember the contract because, just like you mentioned in your book, they sit you down in a room for hours and have a lawyer go through line by line by line. And then in bold, I remember capital letters, bold print. It may have even been a different color. I don't remember that for sure. But it stuck out to me because it said, if you reveal the results of the show, you will owe production $5 million.
$1 million. Man, they did not sit down with the actual contract. I
They
remember
didn't?
no, we didn't have our own copies of it. We signed it and handed it away. Occasionally they would refer to it or one of them would have a copy, but we did
But
not go
you
through
never
it
saw it.
line by
Oh,
line. We were
wow.
supposed to do that on our own. And I remember asking a PA, like, should I have a lawyer look at this? And he was like, you can, but there's nothing you can change. So
Doesn't matter.
it's up to you. But no, they never explained it to us or went through it. They really just went through the part about how if we gave the results away, they would dock our wages for the rest of our lives and we would owe them $5 million. So it wasn't so much an explanation as like
A
really
threat.
fleshing out the legal threats and ramifications.
Right. They're like, in case you didn't read this because you probably won't, here are the things you need to know.
Yeah,
We own
exactly.
you. That's
Yeah, yeah,
it.
yeah.
If you die, it's not our fault. I mean, that one was probably in there 12 times in our contract. If you die,
Yeah,
it's not our fault. And I was like,
yeah.
oh, super safe. Love this, where I'm going out with one bottle of water into the wilderness to try and find $1 million or whatever it was.
And your family can't sue and you can't sue if you get gravely injured.
Uh-huh.
They did not go over any of that with us.
Exactly. So let's talk about the actual dangers and what was going on behind the scenes that people may not or may have caught on to, but some of the things that were more obscure. I think the first thing that was very interesting to me is you being blindfolded and taken somewhere. Like, what's the point of that?
I think they wanted to hype up the reveal and also, make it seem more high stakes because in reality, what was happening is for the first episode, we were in a hotel and we had just gone through days of physical and psychological testing. And
Mm-hmm.
they had narrowed a bunch of contestants down to the people that were going to film the first episode, which was 33 girls. And then they put us on a bus and drove us to a parking lot where we sat and waited for hours to get on a cruise ship, which is not very interesting television. So I do understand why they wanted to add this other element. There was a lot of added hoopla, I think, to just make it more interesting that we were just stepping onto a cruise ship, which is actually not very exciting. Like you see the cruise ship and that's exciting and then that's really it. The rest is just sitting around waiting for porters and stuff. So I think maybe that was part of it, is they wanted to make it more exciting. But the end result was that we weren't just blindfolded, we were blindfolded on a bus going through these winding roads
Oh
for
boy.
I don't know how long, because we weren't allowed to have our phones or a watch, and they would never tell us what time it was. So I don't know how long we drove. I don't know how long we sat in the hot bus. But I do know that I wasn't the only person to vomit from heat stroke. So if that gives anyone an indication of just the amount of like time and physical stress that they put us under, it was a long time, and we were sitting there blindfolded just with our thoughts.
Oh my gosh. And not only that, something else that I remember from that 72-hour show is you're not allowed to talk to each other because part of the whole thing was three strangers on an island, one bottle of water, search, blah, blah, whatever. So we weren't allowed to talk to each other, even through all those meetings, through the checks, through the contracts, through the swim tests, through all the things when we're already in the location, which, by the way, they also wait until you're on the show in another location before they do the contracts, right? Is that how it was for you guys?
We signed them before, and
Okay.
we had to send them. So I think no, I'm pretty sure we had signed them by the time we were on the boat.
Okay.
I'm like pretty sure.
They waited till we were on the island to be like, "Here's the contract." So you're not gonna be like, "No," because you're already there.
I should look and see when it's dated. I still have it. I should see when it's dated to see if I signed it. But I'm pretty sure we did have to sign it because I remember having to scan it and send it in. So there might have been things that we did sign on the boat,
Yeah.
in international waters, but I think the bulk of it we had signed beforehand. But now I'm
Now you're
not
questioning.
sure. I know. I'm gonna
But the
have to check.
whole not talking to people because they want it on camera, but it's completely isolating and you're just like, "What? Where am I? What am I doing?" You can see everybody, but you're not allowed to have conversations.
Mhm.
They took away your phones, any form of entertainment. So you're really just sitting ducks, twiddling your thumbs like, What's
Yeah.
next?"
I mean, for hours. Yeah. And it really stops you from getting any sense of context or getting your bearings at all. It just it hammers home that feeling. And it's something that's really interesting when I talk to people. They're like, "Okay, you couldn't go hours without your phone." And it's like, it's not that I couldn't go hours without my phone. It's that I couldn't sit unable to speak in silence for hours with no entertainment. Like, and I'm not a monk, I am not practiced in meditation. So yeah, it was really difficult.
So let's talk about the show itself and when you're on it, kind of the practices that they put you through. I know you mentioned that most of the girls were kept hungry and exhausted, lack of sleep, doing these intense jobs or filming for hours and hours at a time.
Yeah, and again, because you spend so much time not able to talk, and when you do talk, it's such a controlled environment, and there's so much to talk about, like, very quickly. We didn't really have a lot of time to commiserate about the lack of sleep, and so I don't really remember talking very much to other girls. So I remember feeling like my body was just letting me down because I was so tired all the time, and I didn't really have a gauge of how much sleep I was losing, from the long hours and the long days. And also, a lot of times, we would have these crazy long filming days, and then we would get home and we would either have to do interviews or confessionals, and 14 girls have to get ready for bed and share the bathroom and do the showers. And so, even if we got home at, say, 8 or 9 o'clock, we weren't getting to bed until much, much later. And then we would often have to get up at 5 or 6 in the morning, or sometimes earlier. Like for the video shoot, I think we had to get up at 2 a.m. So
Jeez.
we were running on so little sleep.
What?
And yeah, we had to get up at 2, and then we had to leave, and then we were on site, before sunrise. Yeah, that was one of the longest days. I think that was something like a 20 hour day or something. And I talked to a crew member about it, and they confirmed like just how long it was and how crazy it was for everybody, including the crew. Because a lot of times the crew would be divided into two shifts, so they would take half
Mhm.
the day, and then the other, hunk of the crew would take the second half of the day. But we had to do the whole day. That was, like we didn't have an alternate cast. So it was just incredibly long days. And I remember I talked to a cast member who had a kid, and she had a kid when she was on the show. I think her kid was 1, uh, when she went on the show, and she was still breastfeeding, and she had to coordinate all that. And I was talking to her, and I was like, "Are you the only one who was sleeping more?" when you were shooting than you had been at home. And she was like, no, honestly, I was sleeping much less on the show than I was with a 1-year-old at home. The sleep deprivation reminded me of when my daughter had been a newborn. It was that level of sleep deprivation. And it was so exhausting. And then she was also, I mean, on top of that, trying to pump and breastfeed. So I truly cannot imagine. But it was so validating because at the time I was just like, why am I so tired? Why do I just feel bad all the time? I was 19. I was used to having infinite energy. And I had done all-nighters. I had done, I thought that I should be able to do this and it shouldn't be so hard. But I mean, after I got eliminated, I think I slept for 16 hours. That was just the first thing that I did because it was so exhausting.
Yeah. So the video shoot, are you talking about the Enrique shoot?
Yes, we shot a music video theoretically for Enrique Iglesias that then never aired, and they shot an alternate version. Then we did have an alternate cast. They had this alternate cast that had the like real version of the video that ended up airing on MTV, but they
That's
also shot.
aggravating. That's all
It
just
was
a show.
so weird. It was so weird. Because also, yeah, they had to shoot everything twice, which is probably why they ended up running over time, and it was such a long day. Because it
Yeah.
was so weird.
Well, speaking of the long day, Heather actually did pass out and needed medical care. And the guy was like, because you're so thin and it's so hot, can you please eat tomorrow? And I was like, I have to ask Sarah about this because having been on so many sets working in LA with TV and commercials and music videos, there's always a crafty table with all this types of food, especially for Enrique Iglesias, right? You can
Mhm.
imagine there would be a lot of food there. But was that not given to you, or was that not an option, or did the girls just feel like they couldn't eat it because they had to maintain their figure?
No, it was an option. We did have craft services, and the food was a whole interesting. I have a whole chapter in the book dedicated to how food worked and what and when we ate. But on that particular day, there absolutely was craft services. Most of us did get meals because also a lot of times the crew was union, and so they had to follow union rules.
Yeah.
So they didn't have to contractually. It said in our contract they did not have to feed us, but when you're feeding the crew anyways, a lot of times it would be union crew would go eat first, and then non-union crew would go and eat, and then it was I think drivers and something else, another non-union section of the crew. Someone told me, a crew member told me it was like drivers and some other role, and then they would get food, and then we would get food. So we were usually last.
That's insane. So, again, having been on set for 10 plus years in LA, talent always eats first. They will
Yeah.
jump the line, they will bring you to the front of the line. So, for you guys, you were an afterthought.
I think it's not so much that we were an afterthought. Part of it also was that we always needed someone to be supervising us, and so a lot of it had to do with, like, shifting, you know what I mean? Like, our handlers, quote, unquote, would go eat, and then while we were shooting, and so then they would come back, and a lot of it was, like, a logistical issue, but there was food. We would get food. On that particular day, again, because they were shooting 2 scenes every time they had to shoot, Heather had to skip lunch to shoot her scene, and then she never, made it up. She never asked and didn't think to ask. And I think also because she was so stressed, didn't really feel that she was hungry. And it was so hot. And, by the time she went down, I think we'd been going for 16 plus hours or something in this hot, hot basement where it was LA summer already. And it was this packed, sweaty basement with
Ugh.
hundreds and hundreds of people. And like when you walked in, it felt like you felt that gust of hot air on your face. So yeah, it was heat stroke. And it was really scary because she didn't just faint, because that honestly happened a lot. We saw a lot of girls, or if they didn't fully lose consciousness, but they would like swoon, I guess might be a better word. That would happen a lot of eliminations, any long day. A lot of times we would get hot or overheated, but she really did lose consciousness, and she was like frothing at the mouth. They gave her water. She wasn't keeping that down. She threw it up. Her eyes rolled in the back of her head. Like it looked very scary. And I really
Yeah.
thought that she was in danger. And thank God she wasn't. And she was okay. But it
Yeah.
was a scary moment.
So, can we talk more about the food in the house? I don't remember, although it was so many years ago, I don't remember ever seeing you guys eat on camera. So, what was the food situation like normally on a day to day?
We definitely did eat. And I think there are times when you could see it, but it it depends on the cycle and when they were shooting. But the way it would work is we got $37 a day cash stipend, and we had to use, and that's the only thing we ever got paid. We never got, we didn't get any per diem other than that, and we had to use that $37 to pay for our own food. So like when we first landed in the house, they told us to make a grocery list and give that and a bunch of our cash, like a few days worth of cash, to a PA, and they would go out and do our grocery shopping. And they would tell us that what we had to buy for would be like X amount of breakfasts and X amount of dinners. And then lunch was usually on set. But they said we should be prepared to have an occasional lunch at home, which we, I think, never did. But that was the amount that we were grocery shopping for. So lunch was usually on set, so it was usually crafty, or sometimes they would order, if we were on location, they would order from a restaurant, and and a lot of times they paid for that. Sometimes that would come out of our per diem, depending. I'm not sure actually who made that decision, but I do remember sometimes like we would have to give someone money for whatever we ordered, and so it was always stressful, like when you go out to dinner with someone and you don't know they're going to pay, and when they pay, you're like, "Damn, I would have ordered the lobster." Like it was always like who's paying for this? Because that will radically change what I'm going to order.
Yeah.
But yeah, so lunch was usually covered, not always, but sometimes. And if we were on like elimination days, it was always covered. There was crafty photo shoot days as well, like most of the time. But we usually had to do breakfast ourselves. And so it was like, a lot of Red Bulls, a lot of like Starbucks Frappuccinos and stuff. There was also no microwave and no dishwasher. So when we were ordering, we were sort of conscious of that. Like I remember someone got Hot Pockets and then was like, "What? Do I have to make this in the damn oven? What year is this? This like, this is like a 1912 Hot Pocket." Uh, and so yeah, it was a lot of like fast dinners, and it's interesting, when I talk about the money and the food, a lot of people are like, a lot of moments make sense now. Like it is a big deal that someone stole Bree's granola bars. That was like a big iconic moment, I guess, from an earlier season that I hadn't watched, but I guess somebody stole somebody's granola bars and she was like really upset. And nobody understood why until they realized that she had to pay for those herself. They were probably expensive. That was probably, the only money that she had for food. It was probably all used up because they would give us change from grocery shopping, but if there wasn't any, you didn't get any change. And also, if what you had on your list cost more than the money you gave them, they would decide what not to buy. Because they would decide in the moment. So you kind of had to like budget without knowing, without being at the grocery store and without knowing what anything costs. Also, we were all 19 and very few of us were from LA. So we didn't know, like food costs were very different than they were at home. And so it was pretty stressful.
Yeah, let's talk about the general sentiment or the atmosphere around food as far as the model mindset, because you are being berated constantly by Tyra, by the judges about your weight, about your shape, about your face, about everything physical, right? I mean, that's part of the show. So, were there a lot of girls who just chose not to eat because they were too afraid of gaining weight, or did you feel like that was an issue in the house?
Yeah, I mean, what I say in the book is that I got asked all the time after the show, like, "Oh, did all the girls have eating disorders?" And the only thing I could say is like, "I don't know. I was too distracted with my own." So I was so obsessed with everything that I ate, not just from a caloric standpoint, but also a financial standpoint, because I was trying to save money because I wasn't working. I wasn't making money like I normally needed to in the summer. And so I really needed to save that $37 a day. So I was calculating everything that I bought, both from a caloric standpoint and also from a financial standpoint of trying to save money, trying to eat really cheaply. And also, I didn't know it yet. I didn't have this language at the time, but I'm neurodivergent. I know I'm ADHD. That's the only diagnosis I have, but I do have a lot of sensory issues. And so under that extreme stress, like the thought of eating something that I didn't like or trying something new and it being bad was sending me into absolute spiral. So I really would only eat like safe foods. Well, I was so consumed with what I was eating from all those different angles that I really didn't pay much attention to what the other girls ate. Like I know a lot of the girls did eat and we did talk about it, and a lot of them talked about how their metabolisms were really fast, and we did sometimes share meals, but beyond that, just like the day to day, I don't know. Oh, except I did teach one girl how to I think she would be okay with me saying her name. It was Bianca. Bianca asked me to teach her how to scramble eggs, and I came up into the kitchen and she just like cracked them into the wok. And she was like, "What do I do?" And I was like, "Where even did you find a wok? Like, what kitchen are we in where there's a wok and not a microwave? What is happening?" So we like scrambled eggs. And I do remember that me and Janet and Jenna had cooking experience, and that was it. Like the other girls really did not know how to cook because we were 18, 19 years old. You know, we had just gotten to like college and out on our own. So we were not like, oh, and I think Gabrielle knew how to cook a couple dishes. But even just like knowing to preheat the oven. I remember we had to teach the girls that you had to preheat the oven. You couldn't just shove stuff in there.
Yeah.
Well, there was definitely like a lot of that conversation around food. I would not have noticed if anyone was dieting. We did not talk about it that much amongst ourselves. Or if we did, we would talk about like insecurities we had about our bodies, but not diets really.
So, what are some of the things that you feel like would surprise people the most about the behind the scenes and what you guys had to go through that wasn't broadcast? Because a lot of the trauma and the abuses were broadcast, and we all were just like, oh, it's just normal because they're getting judged. But really, it was really harsh. I saw a couple comments saying, I didn't realize how bad it was till I rewatched it as an adult. But what about the things that we didn't see?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that surprises people is that we did not get paid anything
Yeah.
beyond the stipend that we had to use to pay for our own food. People find that surprising. And also, you know, the long hours, I think, are not necessarily clear. Like, it's not clear that we are not getting a break because the timing of the shooting was like every week on the show was about 4 to 5 days. And we would often go like really long periods of time without any real break. Like I remember our first day off and I was like, "Oh, like a whole day?" We still had to do interviews, we still had to do confessionals, we were still mic'd. It was still, you know, a reality show, but we didn't have to leave the house, which for an introvert is a lot. I'm a very introverted person. I really need alone time. And so the other thing I think that that surprises people and is sort of hard to convey is every time you see someone on a reality show and it's not a very candid shot, right? It's not just them talking to someone else, you know, to kill time or something. If they're sitting and it's like the interview shot, right, where they always have that same outfit, everything that they're saying is coming from a question, right?
Hmm.
Like, and it's very hard to sort of portray how different that is from someone just talking at a camera. Even this, right? This is me and you talking, and you are asking me questions, but my answers are coming from me. You don't have an answer in mind when you're asking me. And they always did. And it's very hard to convey like how much that's not necessarily an accurate representation of who they are when you're watching a reality.
Yes. Yes, I know what you're talking about. So I did another so random, guys. I've done too many reality shows. Right when I moved to LA, I was like, I gotta be on TV. And so I just said yes to everything. But I did this random, it was like a matchmaker show, Who Wants to Date a Comedian, the type of show that airs at midnight on Comedy Central. And
What
they
comedian did
were,
you date?
I don't even remember his name because he wasn't famous. Nobody was. It was so dumb.
Oh my God. I'm gonna have to look it up later.
Oh no, it was so cringy. I won. But anyways,
Wait, so
so
did you get to go on a date?
So he wanted to take me to Vegas. He's like, let's go to Vegas. I was like, sure, if I can have my own room. Like, I don't know who you are, you complete
Yeah.
stranger. And then he said no. And he's like, and then that was it. But I was like, whatever. I won the $500 that I needed to pay rent. So I didn't really care.
That's so funny. I have to look. Wait a
So,
minute.
oh my gosh, don't look it up. So the thing is, though, throughout the whole day, they're writing down everything that happened, right? It's somebody's job to just sit and take notes and journal what happened to everybody. And then you get to the interview and they go through it. They're like, this happened. Tell us how you feel. But it's mostly like, you were disgusted, right? When I think his name was Gary, when Gary did this thing, and then you have to be like, oh, I was so disgusted when Gary, blah, blah, blah. Like you're saying, it's not really your words.
When somebody says, "Oh, I was so disgusted when that happened," it's because someone said, "Weren't you so disgusted?" Like you, and you have to repeat the question back.
Yes. So I remember that being the first time when I got a glimpse. Oh, is this how it works in reality TV? Because I always wondered when they do those interviews and then they're in the same clothes, but they're somehow reacting as if it's real time. I was like, how are they remembering those things? It's because it's someone's job to write it down and tell you what to say about it.
100%. It's wild. Like it's very hard. I think that's one of the things that's so hard to like convey to people who've never been on a reality show. And the thing is I think because reality shows are so common and so many people have been on so many, there is this idea of like, oh, I know what I would do. I know how I would act in that situation. And that's the other thing that I think people would be surprised by if they could sort of get the context is like, you really don't know how you would act. And you know, we all surprised ourselves all the time.
Well, there's two sides of it, right? Because on one hand, you're like, "Oh, I totally know how I would act," and you could just react totally differently based on what the producer's saying to you, based on what just previously happened, based on if you're tired or hungry or out of sorts, you're not feeling well. And also, let's say you do give your best answer. It is like A plus, golden answer. I would repeat that answer anytime someone asked me because it was such a good answer and it doesn't fit the narrative, so it's cut and no
Mhm,
one sees it.
mhm. I remember I was so proud of myself because on the video shoot, they kept asking me how uncomfortable I felt in my costume because we all had these, extreme music video costumes, and mine was like a
Yeah.
fishnet mesh outfit with, I don't know if they were fully like stripper pleaser heels, but they were like 8-inch heels. And I remember that because I was so proud that I could walk in them because at the beginning when we shot the promo shoots, I'd been in, they were actually like ballet point shoes, but um, I couldn't walk in them at all. And I was like, I've made so much progress. I'm walking in 8-inch heels. And they kept trying. And for once, I understood what they wanted and I knew what they were trying to get me to do. And I was confident enough and I was like brave enough to not do it. And I just kept digging my heels in and I wouldn't say it. I was like, I like it. I like this costume. I like how I look. I like this outfit. I sincerely don't remember if that was true because I was just so determined not to give them the answer they wanted. And they took a clip from something else where I said, "Oh, that makes me super uncomfortable." And they used that
Oh,
to make it seem like I was talking about my costume, and I was so mad. It was one of the only places where it's called frankenbiting, where they take a bite from something else and kinda cobble you together, and it didn't I think it happened to me twice, and that was one of them, and the other one I didn't really mind, and this
right.
one really bothered me.
Well, because that's what they used to eliminate you. That was their motive, that was their reasoning, their fuel. And so they were trying so hard to get you to play into that fuel to make it make sense.
Yeah,
And that's what's so aggravating is when the producers create a storyline, they want it to go a certain direction. In fact, one of the times it didn't work, actually a couple times, was with this dating show. The producer, he told me after, he's like, the producers kept telling me to pick this other girl, but I didn't want to. And then same with Millionaire Matchmaker. They had this girl who they gave hair and makeup, nobody else got it. They kept pushing the millionaire to take that, and he didn't. He picked me. Yay, look at me go. But still, it's annoying that the producers normally are like, no, we want it to go this direction, so we have to make that narrative work. If we have to make the girls more tired, if we have to get them to fight, if we have to bring up trauma, we will do it because
mhm,
they have already decided, not just the producers, the network. It goes up the chain, right? They're
yeah,
deciding what is considered entertainment and they're going to do whatever it takes to get that end result. So I want to talk about that elimination. There's so much to say from reshoots to them blaming your size to them just overall kind of attacking the way that you feel about yourself, even though they've planted the entire season. So
yeah.
walk us through what it was like in that moment, the elimination day.
So the elimination day was like any elimination day, one of the longest shoot days that we had. they would often go from like 5 a.m. until about midnight or later.
Oh my
They were
gosh, why
very
would it
long
take
days.
so long?
Well, we would get, I say 5 a.m. We would often have to leave by like 7:30 or 8. And for however many girls there are to shower and get ready, it takes a long time. So we would get up, very early and get ready, go to set. And a lot of times we would just have to sit there on ice for a few hours. It was the most on ice we ever had to do, in a day. And so it was a lot of sitting quietly. And the elimination before, I think I had been convinced I was going home, or maybe two before. I'd been totally convinced I was going home. And then I didn't. And so I was like, all right, I'm here. I'm doing it. And I sort of thought maybe I had done well in the shoot, but I wasn't sure. I knew that the director had really liked me, of the Jesse Torero, who shot the music video, but he was not one of the judges. So I was like, he'll be the guest judge. And I was right. He was the guest judge. When they were giving me notes on my performance, they said, oh, you look so great. You look so great on camera, but that positioning is not good. You look really like you're all scrunched up. And Jesse, the director, was like, in her defense, we actually positioned her. It was a really tight shot. And so we put her like that and we told her not to move. And Tyra was sort of like, oh, well, you still have to make any position look good. She should look better. And I was like, okay, I'll take that. But I see what happened there is they thought they had this really valid criticism and then it sort of fell apart. But and then again, they commented on my weight and Nigel said, you look very uncomfortable. You look like you don't like what you're wearing. And you actually just you just grimaced when you saw it. And I remember being like, oh, that wasn't a grimace. Like I saw myself and I went, because I looked kind of badass. And I actually did have a genuine moment of surprise at myself, like seeing myself on camera. Because this was also, I think, one of the first times that I'd seen myself in video. It wasn't still photos. And so it was kind of exciting. And I put my hand to my mouth because I was like, oh. And I guess he thought, or he was trying to make it seem like that was me being uncomfortable with my body. And I tried to correct him and they kind of wouldn't let me. And I sort of said, okay. And then the thing that I remember that did not make it to air is Twiggy said, well, I can understand why you would be uncomfortable in that outfit. You look kind of like a ham, like a cooked ham. And then Miss J said something that was like still sort of roasting me, but also gently kind of pushing back against what Twiggy said. I think they said something like, I don't know, that's a ham I think a lot of people would like to take a bite out of, or like something, or something where I was like, oh, that seems actually very kind, like, and if top model taught me anything, it really was the difference between like straight roasting and gay roasting. And like, reading is fundamental. And so I will absolutely be read all day long, but straight roasting is mean. And Twiggy was straight roasting me. Like a ham. And I was then very uncomfortable because this woman had just called me a ham. And then they started talking about how I'd lost weight. And I remember asking, like, should I try to gain weight? Because this keeps coming up. Should I try to put on weight? Because I'm not trying to lose weight. And I happen to know, because I weigh myself obsessively, that I actually really have not lost much weight. I've lost 3 pounds, which when you're 5'11" really does not make much of a difference. And I gain and lose that much every month hormonally. So I have to assume like that maybe you want me to be bigger. Do you want me to gain weight? And no one would say yes. No one would look at me. No one would answer me. And so there was just this incredibly awkward silence. And then they just sent me to the back. And I remember thinking like, man, like what do they want me to do? I hope I made it clear that I'll do it, like I would have. My eating disordered ass in that moment would have gained weight, which for me to try to do was anathema to everything that was inside of me and all of my inner monologue. But I would have done it at that point. But I think they had this idea of a narrative that I was losing weight because I was insecure, and they were so attached to it, but they still couldn't bring themselves to tell a girl to gain weight because that's just not something that you do on a show about modeling. So it was like this very exemplary moment. And then, then when I got eliminated, they called Chantal's name. She was in the bottom two with me. And I remember thinking before it happened, like, fuck, I can't take this spot from Chantal. The first thing I heard this girl say was, I was put on this earth to model and make babies. I don't know what I was put on this earth for, but I'm pretty sure it's not modeling. Like, I can't take this from her, you know? I know that she wants it more than me. And so then when they called her name, I was so relieved that it wasn't her. But then I was, was disappointed and sad that it was me. And my first thought was like, I'm so tired. And the second that thought crossed my mind, I just started crying. And it was and I like really weeping, like hiccuping, snorting. And I'm trying to pull it together because, Chantal's having this like really beautiful moment. She's like going forward, and Tyra hugged her, which was a very big deal. And like told her, like, you're going to do better than this. Like, you're going to you're going to pull yourself up from this. You're going to do better. And she was like, I will, I promise I'm going to do so much better. And meanwhile, I'm like 6 inches away, just like, because I know that they're trying to film this beautiful moment. I'm literally messing up the audio because I'm like crying so intensely. And then Chantal like doesn't know if she should hug me or like what she should do. She like reaches out and pats me on the back, like, and I was like, just go, it's fine. And then Tyra was like, kind of trying to shake me out of it. She was like, I know it hurts so bad, but it's gonna be okay. And I was like, this isn't, and I was trying so hard to be like, this isn't about you. This isn't about, I don't know what this is, but it's not what you think. Like, and I think I was just so exhausted that like all the emotions of the last however long we'd been shooting, like came pouring out of me all at once. And I like couldn't get it together forever. Like they tried to do an on the fly interview afterwards. I still couldn't get it together. I'm still like snorking and snotting. And then finally they were like, it's not going to happen. We're not going to get this interview. Just like get her back to the house. And they did the interview at the house. And I just remember like, I felt like a robot, like trying to pretend to be human, cause I was so fried and I was so ready to be done, but I still had to like do this interview and pack up all my stuff and go to the hotel and do all this exit interviews and like be a human being. And I just wanted to like, implode. And then so there was a sound guy that I had a bunch of bits with very early in shooting. His name was Frank. He was very funny. We had a bunch of bits. I don't know, because he's one of the few crew members we were allowed to talk to, because he would mic us in the morning, and you weren't allowed to talk to any crew members, but he was miking you. And so I would do bits with him. And so I think they thought like that talking to him would make me feel better. So I'm sitting in this hotel room that they kept me in after we got eliminated. And all I want is for the handler to leave so I can be alone, because I haven't been alone for like a month, and I'm going in, and I'm like, she's going to leave soon. I can do this. And then she's like, okay, you have to talk to the psychiatrist. So I'm talking to the psychiatrist, and I'm like, she's like, how are you? And I'm like, great. I really want to be alone. And she's like, but are you okay with everything? I was like, I'm great. I just really, really, really want to be alone. And she's like, all right, well, sounds like you're good. So I hang up, and then I'm like, okay. And I'm like saying to the handler, I'm like, thank you so much for everything. And she was like, actually, we have one more thing to do. And I was like, okay. Oh, because also we'd been grocery shopping. They took me grocery shopping on the way home. We got food, and then we got Panda Express, and then we went grocery shopping, and then we were at this hotel room. So it's been a long ass day, and I am fried, and I'm just like, get out. So she hands me the phone, and it's Frank, and they're like, it's Frank. We thought it might make you feel better to talk to Frank. So I'm like, hi, thank you. I would like to hang up now. Thank you so much. Bye. Just like, like just losing my mind. And then she's like, do you want me to sit here while you call your boyfriend? And I was like, I really don't. Like, and I think I ended up being very rude, because I was like, can you please go? Like, you gotta go, man. It's like, and then she left, and I just was like, oh my God, like I can find myself again. I can like figure out who I am outside of the cameras and the producers and the chaos. And like, I think it was the biggest relief I've ever had in my life. It was crazy. Like second, maybe to like giving birth, just that feeling of like, oh my God, I'm done. I did it. It was really
Yeah.
wild. I feel bad because I think I was like very rude because I was like, just get out, thank you so much, get the fuck out. If you say one more second, I'll die.
Ugh. No, I get that. That feeling of being completely isolated. You're not allowed to talk to your friends or family. You are in this world and it is their world and it is hyper controlled. When you eat, what you do, who you talk to, when you talk to them. I mean, just complete control. And then you finally are just waiting to take that breath. Just let me breathe. Just let me breathe. Just let me breathe. I'm suffocating. Get out of here. Just let me
Yeah,
breathe. And
like the
then
end is
finally
in
just
sight. Yeah, and finally she did leave. It felt so good. Felt so good.
So, what was it like that conversation with your boyfriend? I didn't realize you had a boyfriend.
I did have a boyfriend. Well, yeah, and now he's my husband. Um, yeah, I don't remember if I did talk to him that day. I think I talked to him maybe even the next day because I really was just so like I don't actually want to talk to anybody else. I have been doing interviews for hours. I have been crying for hours. I am so spent. So I think it might have been the next day. But it had been so weird because, I had signed this NDA. And that's another thing that a lot of people don't know is when you talk on the phone, first of all, everyone that you talk to had to sign a very similar contract to yours, agreeing to be recorded and to basically have their life rights available for the show in case they needed to like give any context of like, this is, Sarah talking to her boyfriend who lives in Connecticut. Like all that information they have to sort of sign away. Or like, my best friend signed and they were like, this is Maggie or Michael or Meredith or whatever. All M names. That's funny. I never noticed that. And so like all of that everyone on the phone call has signed a lot of NDAs and contracts, but you're still actually not allowed to tell them anything. And the producers were constantly like, you guys have to stop talking so much when you talk on the phone. And I remember being like, when are we supposed to do that? Like, what's the point of, talking on the phone if you can't talk about anything that happened? We weren't allowed to say anything that had happened, no names, no like no dates, no places, no proper nouns, nothing that the judges had done. You could say, panel went badly. That's it. Couldn't say why or what anyone had said. And so he had also started a job where he had to sign an NDA and couldn't tell me anything. So on the phone, we would be like, "Ooh, we are running on fumes and vibes here. How was your day? Good? Good. Also good." So I think when we finally did talk, I was like, "How is your new job?" Like, he was like, "It's really weird. How is the reality show?" And I was like, "It's really weird." So I think it was just a lot of like, I don't know, details, like boring details. Um,
Yeah.
like about, yeah, he had a new apartment. He'd moved to a new state. It was, I think just sort of a lot of like almost reintroducing ourselves.
Right. I want to talk about how you felt like a shallow, hollow person after the show and what the after effects really were. But first, I have to get your true opinions on Tyra and what she was like on camera versus off camera.
I hate to disappoint you. She is pretty much the same off
Is
camera as she
she?
is on camera. I don't think that's who she really is, but I think that's who she lets people see. I think she's very
Got it.
guarded. I think she has a very small inner circle that gets to see what she is really like. And I sometimes say that and I feel like it sounds like I'm criticizing her. It sounds like I'm saying that's a bad thing. I do have criticisms of Tyra, to be clear. That just isn't one of them. I think when you are that famous and when you have been that famous from such a young age, you have very few interactions where people aren't asking for something from you,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's an actual thing or an autograph or uh, your presence, whatever it is. There's a feeling of like the power dynamic is always such that when you interact with her, she has something to give you and you don't have something to give her, really. So I don't begrudge her being guarded at all. I think it makes sense. And I think I think it probably is a smart defense mechanism. But yeah, when the cameras turned off, she was different, but it was just a different sort of performance, really. Um,
Would she still interact with you guys off camera?
a little bit, but not a lot. There were very few times when we were not uh, on camera or going to be on camera shortly. Like obviously, during panel there would be breaks and there would be moments, but she was really like, she was filming her own thing, and certainly we were never like around her without the cameras there, just like loose, or unsupervised. I think maybe later that changed a little bit, but I certainly don't think it was ever like if they were ever around her without cameras or when it wasn't being filmed, they were also on ice. So there was never like just chatting without the
Mhm.
cameras there. So every moment that we were near her made it onto the show in some capacity. Um, she was, a producer of the show as well. So, and she did, always seem very concerned with our well being, which I always appreciated. She was always like, trying to make sure that we were fed and that we were hydrated. That was the biggest thing. 'Cause a lot we would get dehydrated during elimination days because they were really long. And if you weren't careful, you could go a really long time without drinking any water. And so, she would make sure that they were bringing us Gatorade and stuff. So I did appreciate that, but that was sort of the extent of our interactions off camera was like her as a producer, really.
Yeah.
Um, I did do the Tyra show later, and she seemed a little bit more personable and a little bit more open, but it still was, I don't know, it felt like just another version of her that she was sort of presenting. But she was nice and she was sweet. And I ran into her once at a premiere where she didn't even walk the red carpet. I think she was there for her kid because it was a Disney movie. And I had purple hair at the time. Like I'd obviously changed a lot since my makeover, but she could kind of tell that she knew me. And I was like, I was on your show. She was like, okay. But yeah, I think she's a very guarded person, which I think is fair. I think she has a lot
Yeah.
to guard against.
That makes sense. Yeah, we didn't even get into the actual dangers of like standing on ice modeling or even just being incredibly uncomfortable in a dress that's too small and shoes that are 2 sizes too small with your feet bleeding and all of those things that they're just like, well, deal with it because you're a model. I mean,
Yeah.
that goes way beyond the show and just into the modeling industry in general, where they just don't really see you as a human. They see you as a tall hanger.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Um,
super rough, but I wanna make sure we get to the point of you afterwards because that's a big part of your story, the aftermath of how it actually made you feel, who you were as a person. Did it completely kill your self-confidence, or did you feel like you could finally just breathe and be yourself? What was that like for you?
I mean, after the show, another thing that a lot of people are often surprised by is that they don't send you home right away. They keep you in a hotel for I think a randomized amount of time, or I don't know if it's randomized. Someone is deciding, but one girl was kept there for 3 weeks. I was there for 2 weeks. Some girls were only there for a
Whoa.
couple days. One girl was there for almost 2 months. Ebony was kept all the way until the very end of shooting. She went to China with them and walked in the final show. So you don't go home after you're eliminated, or very few girls do. And I don't know if they do that with other shows, but so I was in that hotel for 2 weeks, and you don't have the key. You're not allowed to leave, and they don't pay for your food anymore. They did pay for that final like grocery store trip, but they wouldn't tell me how much food to buy. So they did, yeah, I mean, they weren't paying for food anymore, so I didn't get enough for the whole, like, time, and yeah, it's very weird, it's, like, very fancy jail, and a lot of the girls really struggled and really hated it. I talked to Kimberly Lehmans, and she was like, "Yeah, I mean, I told the shrink, like, I'm not okay. I feel like my world has been destroyed. I feel like I've lost my sense of self. I don't know what to do. I'm not okay." And she just hung up, and then they put me in a hotel room alone for almost 2 months. Um, so I know that her mental health really suffered, and she asked for support and was not given it. I unfortunately, or fortunately for me, loved it. I'm so introverted that if you could have asked me to design my perfect world after being eliminated, it would be to be alone in a hotel room for 2 weeks. Yeah, I would just switch beds, and we were allowed to leave sometimes to let housekeeping come in. So like people were changing the sheets, people were cleaning it, and it was great. I just wrote in my journal and watched TV and smoked cigarettes, and it was just a little isolated gremlin. And, but then I went home, and I think what I was surprised by is that I was financially so devastated because I had been able to work all summer and I had actually lost money. And so when I went back to school, I had no money for even like, I had to get help to pay for my meal plan, which I'm fortunate enough that I could get. I had people that I could ask to, buy me a meal plan, but like that was all that I was able to eat. And I remember at one point, um, I was doing press for the show. I was doing radio shows, and I had lost my dining card. And so I couldn't afford to buy any food, but there was a vending machine in my dorm that would spit out 2 things sometimes. And so, like, if I could cobble together change, I would get, like, 2 snacks for the price of 1. And so I remember, like, I was doing this radio interview for a morning show, and they were like, "Okay, Sarah, this is what we ask everybody. What did you have for breakfast?" And I was like, "I had a Diet Dr. Pepper and some goldfish." And they were like, "Oh my god, such a model answer." And I was like, "No, that's a broke ass answer. That's what that is." Because that's what I could get out of the vending machine. And so, yeah, I mean, it was rough, and modeling is like any freelance job. A lot of times there's kind of a cost of entry, and you don't make money right away, and it's a really hard job. And when I went to agencies, they all hated the haircut that the show had given me and told me to come back in a year. So it was really weird. It was like I'd been thrust into this industry with no real tools to navigate it.
Right. And not only that, but some of the things that you were promised were not actually given to you.
Yeah, I mean, they did give us prints of our photos, which was great. You can't really use them in your book. First of all, I couldn't use them in my book because everyone hated the hair, so I had to wait for it to grow out. So by the time I was modeling, I didn't look like those photos, and you can't have photos in your book that don't reflect your current look. And also the things that make ANTM photo shoots so great for TV, the elaborate sets and the elaborate costumes and hair and makeup, actually don't make them great for a modeling book because you kind of need
Right.
to show off. You need to be a hanger, and so it kind of obscures your like frame and your face, and it doesn't show what you're really bringing to the client. So I sometimes had them in my book, sometimes didn't. I kind of went back and forth, and clients were always fully neutral on them. Like it was never a positive thing.
So you never felt like it was a benefit that you were on this huge TV show with Tyra Banks about modeling?
I mean, it was a benefit in that I had never considered modeling and I didn't know anything. I didn't know that plus size modeling existed. So it was a complete introduction to the world for me, for sure. And an introduction to the possibility and to the potential of a career. But beyond that, it certainly did not give me tools. And after leaving the show, it was very hard. And also, I think people have this idea of like, oh, well, if you get an agency, then you'll work all the time and then you'll make money. But number one, that's not true. And number two, unless you are like 15, 16 years old, when you sign with an agency, they don't put any money forward. If
Yeah.
they really believe in your potential, they will give you money for test shoots or for a haircut, but they take that money out of all your checks when you do
Mhm.
start booking jobs. So I was lucky enough that like I had an agency pay for some test shoots, but then when I finally did book a job, there was $500 taken out of it for that test shoot. So yeah, it's a very weird transition to go from a reality show to actual modeling, and there was not nearly as much overlap as I think people might think.
Yeah. And then after that, you realized, do I even want to be a model? And I think, is it in your bio that said something about you went from a plus size model to a plus size person and
Yeah.
realized that those two things are not the same?
Yeah. I mean, I did realize that pretty quickly when I was working as a plus size model. But I quit modeling when I was, I think, 27. And I had realized that this was an amazing opportunity that I had stumbled into, and I was so grateful for it. But I also realized that it wasn't my passion, and I was surrounded by people for whom it was a passion. Like I remember meeting Ashley Graham at a casting and being like, she was not famous then. We were just at the same catalog casting, but I remember being like, man, like she wants this in a way that I don't think I do. Like she's hungry for it in a way that I don't think I am. And so, yeah, when I quit to sort of figure out what I wanted to do after that, I had to figure out how to exist in a body that wasn't my livelihood anymore. And so I was like, what am I going to exercise for myself? Just to take care of myself? That doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to get any money for it. I can't write it off on my taxes. Like, gross. My gym membership wasn't a tax write off anymore. I was like, well, I'm not going to go. Yeah, I really had to figure out how to feed myself. I had to like do a lot of work. And luckily I have an amazing support system. And I also had a great therapist that was really helpful, but I became a plus size person. And and it's so interesting shopping at stores that I used to model for that I couldn't shop at. It's so surreal.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And so where does that leave you now? I know in part of your book you're saying, now I don't need anybody's validation. I can just unapologetically be me. I know you're into comedy now, which is super fun. You're clearly funny. So what
Well,
is it
thank
that
you.
brings you joy and happiness?
Oh man, gosh, lots of things bring me joy and happiness. I'm super lucky. But I do feel like I am much more self-assured and self-confident, which I think, also happens with age. I was always super afraid of getting older and middle age, and I don't know when it was when it suddenly clicked for me, like, oh wait, this is awesome. Like this is amazing. I get to actually be who I want. And it's interesting because, I think everybody seeks validation in a million different ways from a million different people in our lives, right? Whether it's just how people treat you when you go out into the world, how your friends and family treat you. Like, I don't want to say that I don't need validation from anyone because humans are pack animals, but I certainly am able to do so much more just for myself and I feel so much more secure in who I am, and I like it a lot better, and it's been really interesting to realize, like, learning how to talk to yourself and be kind to yourself is a muscle, and the hump that I had to get over was, like, you feel so dumb when you start doing it, right? Like, when I started changing my inner monologue, it feels so uncomfortable and dumb because it is a muscle. You're starting this whole new exercise. And the first few times that I like caught myself just thinking something kind about myself without like forcing it was so rewarding and so validating because I'd been working on it for so long and now it just happened organically, like finally, like it became muscle memory. So that's been, really rewarding and really great. But I think the biggest thing that brings me joy is my kid. Like, she's awesome. And she makes me so happy. And making her happy is like the best. Yeah, I'm not doing comedy as much as, necessarily as I used to, or maybe as I would like, but I do get to make her laugh. So that's pretty great. Honestly, and it's really easy. Like, I can kill. I can really, like, just a solid fart sound and I'm in. You know what I mean? That's my, that's my closing
Yeah.
joke. Yeah.
I feel like having kids is such a confidence boost in so many ways because they just love you so much and just want to be around you. And like you said, any little thing can make them laugh. And you're like, yeah, I got this. That
Yeah,
was
I
me. That was all
totally
me.
nailed that. Yeah. No, it is wild, and it's crazy because, yeah, we have all these things of, like, these I had all these preconceived notions of, like, "Oh, you have a kid and your body changes, and so then your confidence is totally tanked," and, like, that's true, don't get me wrong, and then again, you have to, like I had to use all those tools that I had built all those years ago of, like, liking myself and accepting change and also not really caring nearly as much about how I look. But it is also, yeah, it's such a confidence boost in so many ways because I don't know, you have this thing that you get to just be forever. Like, modeling was so temporary and so it felt so ephemeral and so confusing. And, you know, when something is tied to your looks, it's it feels unsteady, and this is so
Yeah.
much like steadier.
No, I definitely feel that. I'm still in the midst of it, and I won't take a long time here because we're
Mhm.
almost out of time. But I
No,
totally
you're
related to like the body dysmorphia side of things and being in the industry. And I tried to get into modeling. No one would take me because I was too short. And then doing the acting thing, and I was think I was like 140 pounds, 23 maybe, and I go into this casting where you get to read. You have literally they time it. It's like 30 seconds with this big casting director, and you walk in, you do your script, and her feedback to me was, "Well, you have a leading lady face, but you're not skinny enough to be the leading lady, so you're going to have to be funny."
yeah.
And I was like, okay. And the sad part was I believed her. I was like, "You're right. I need to lose weight. I'm the heaviest I've ever been at 140, and this is crazy, and I need to get back to 120." And that's so sad that that was just, in my head in the industry. And
I
I did
know.
book the most when I was thin and extremely depressed and at the lowest point in my life. That's when I was booking the most commercials. And now that I've had a child and now that I actually have like the mom and baby, I book way less. And I'm like, damn it, it's because I gained weight, but it's okay because I created a human. But it's also hard because I've been programmed to like, no, you have to be skinny.
Oh,
So it's
constantly.
so, so hard.
When I read my diary, there's so many entries where I'm like, all I write is how much I weighed that day and what I ate. And I'm like,
Oh,
girl,
man.
you met Tyson Beckford on this day. Like, why don't you write about that? Like, interesting things happened outside of your weight and outside of what you look like. But I was
Yeah.
so obsessed. Yeah. So freeing myself from the shackles of diet culture has definitely been positive. But it is hard because the rest of the world
Yeah.
is still really obsessed with it. But I think hopefully we can make some positive changes.
Yes, absolutely. So with that, what's your Linda listen moment for me? Could be to somebody who's pissed you off or someone you want to have a final word to. It could be to Tyra if you wanted, or it could be to our audience. It's up to you.
All right. Linda, listen. You can't love yourself from the inside out if you don't want to. You can't force it. I can't force it. People ask me sometimes, what would you say to your younger self? And I say nothing. That bitch would not listen. She was so dumb
I love
and
that. That's hilarious.
so stubborn because I wasn't ready. She wasn't ready. And I understand why. And I love her for that. And if that's you, I understand and I love you for that. But I can't say anything to convince you to try to love yourself from the inside out. But I can tell you that it's fucking awesome. And I can tell you that my life has been better. I can tell you that I have been more successful and I have accomplished more and done more things since I stopped caring what I looked like. And that's all I can say. And I can just hope that you will remember those words when you are ready. So your life will get better.
I love that. It's so hard, right? Self-love is such an easy concept, but such a difficult one to implement if you're not in that headspace. So I definitely relate to that. Thank you so much for coming on, Sarah. It's been such a
Thank
pleasure talking
you.
to you and
Yeah.
going down memory lane myself with all these crazy reality
So
shows.
wild. That's so funny. Yeah. I've never met anyone
Yeah.
who's done more than one.
Oh,
Well, I
yeah.
guess
I
that's
think I've
not
done
true.
like 4, maybe
But like such
5.
different modeling and dancing and dating comedians. That's you ran the gamut.
And dating millionaires.
And dating
No,
millionaires,
one
right?
of the reasons though that I used because I didn't want to go hang out with the millionaire that picked me because he was like, "Come fly out to Arizona," and I was like, "Oh, but we can't tell anyone the results of the show, so I instead of lying, let's just wait till the show comes out and then I will." And he's like, "You're so fake. I never would have picked you if I knew you were an actor." Blah 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 blah. And I was like, "Oh, you're crazy. Bullet
Oh, yeah.
dodged.
Yeah.
I'm out of here."
Front row. Oh no.
Oh
That's
yeah.
yeah.
So, it's been crazy. Tell everybody where they can find you, where they can buy your book, and where they can follow you.
Yeah, you can find me, Sarah B. Hartshorne across all platforms and also sarahbhartshorne.com. And I plug the book a lot on all my platforms. But if you want to buy it directly, you can go to youwannabeontop.com, a domain name I cannot believe was
I
available,
love
but
that.
it is youwannabeontop.com because that's the name of the book. Yeah, or if you just search for it, you'll find it on my publisher's website as well, or on the Penguin Random House website. But Yeah. You can click through any way you want to buy it. It doesn't matter. Sometimes people say, oh, what's the best way to buy it? Anyway, audiobook. I narrated it. It was super fun. Buy it
Yes.
on Amazon or Barnes and Noble or however. Just buy it.
I can't hear that phrase without singing it. The "Do you want to be on top?" All I hear is my head.
Nope.
So good. Well, thank you so much again. Do you have any final thoughts before we go?
Oh gosh, I don't think so. I think I've emptied all my thoughts.
Amazing. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. Make sure to leave those words of encouragement down below for Sarah. Go buy her book, check it out, listen to or read the entire story. And that is the best way to support the podcast and our guests, by interacting with them, interacting with our posts, supporting them through the comments. It boosts the algorithm so more people will see it and become more aware of these groups and the manipulation and abuse tactics that are employed by cults. And employed, is that the right word? I don't think that's the right word.
Employed, I think.
Employed. Thank you. By cults. Thank you, for the writer in the room.
We implore
And
you to we implore you to comment so you can learn how they employ these tactics.
That's the word. Thank you very much. Pregnancy brain. Doing my best. So yes, thank you guys for being here. If you want to support the podcast even more, you can become a patron at patreon.com/cults2consciousness. But we did release channel memberships. If you want special YouTube specific perks, that is finally available. You can check that out. It's really easy to join a tier. They all have special perks and badges and things like that, even special live streams depending on the tier. If you like this video, I will link 2 more down here below. Thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.